there's another aspect to this whole program. I'm talking me, Richard Doty. I'm not talking about anybody else. I didn't ever strong-arm anyone, threaten anyone, pull a gun on anyone, although I carried a gun, threatening with crimes or threatening them to kill them or their families because they wouldn't cooperate. Never, ever happened. Now, did it happen within the intelligence community? Do I know cases where it happened? Absolutely. It wasn't me. I never did it. You talk about the Men in Black. There was a section in Washington, D.C., headed by a person I knew very well that did the dirty tricks.
Tonight on My Alien Life, I am joined by Richard Doty. Mr. Doty is a retired special agent who worked for the United States Air Force Office of Special Investigation. Thank you for listening to Hour 1 of this 2-hour special report. I am Cameron Brower. That and more coming right up. My Alien Life is recorded live from atop the Northern Rocky Mountains and is available on Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes, and everywhere fine podcasts are found. My website is at www.myalienlifepodcast.com. There you will find my email address, all previously recorded shows, and more. I am Cameron Brower. This is My Alien Life, and the podcast starts right now.
My Alien Life Podcast.
Three, two, 1, 0, and liftoff.
I feel very fortunate to have Richard Doty in the studio. Mr. Doty has had a very interesting life, to say the least, and I'm ready to jump right in and hopefully answer some questions and shed some light on an often confusing career. Mr. Doty, welcome to the show. And am I just guessing, but when I look at your career and become extremely confused, would you say that was because of a job well done?
Yes, definitely. Job well done. I've had that said before, but not by the UFO community.
And I want to welcome you again to the show. And again, thank you for your service. We will get to some backstory in a moment, but I want to ask you about Mirage Men, which I think is a good movie. It's really confusing, and it's hard for me to maintain a track on that and try to even figure out what your life was like, because it throws so much information initially at you, and you're left kind of hanging, trying to figure that out. How were you approached to do a movie about your life?
Well, I wasn't. I met Mark Pinkleton and John Lundenberg in Laughlin, Nevada in 2006 while during a UFO convention, the UFO convention that used to be in Laughlin. And now it's back in Laughlin, but before it was in Laughlin. And they approached me and asked me if I would do an interview with them. That Mark was thinking about doing a special for UK television. They're both from the United Kingdom. And I said, well, what do you want to talk about? And they told me several things about the subject of UFOs and the investigations I had done in the past, the Paul Benowitz incident, and several other things. So I agreed to an interview. They asked me for a release. I refused to provide a release. I said, no, I'm not going to provide any kind of a release because I don't want this. They had promised me that what I said, all my answers during the interview would be strictly confidential, and they would approach me at some later time if they wanted my interview into their special or their television movie. I said, sure. Okay, so we did that. They asked me a lot of questions. I answered them. There were, I think, 3 sessions total there at Laughlin. And then a few weeks after the convention was over with, they came to Albuquerque. They asked me to meet with them there. I did. I actually got them onto Kirtland Air Force Base. I was still in reserves at that time, so I was able to access the base. And I showed them a few things around the base, and that was it. I didn't hear from them again until a person familiar with the book that he was going to write and familiar with the movie had called me and said, you know that you're in a movie that Mark made regarding those interviews. And I said, well, I never authorized any kind of book, or I didn't authorize it. I never signed a release. So this person interfaced with John and Mark. John kind of got out of it. John said, I'm not going to get involved in this because I don't want to get in trouble. And so, but Mark continued on with a guy by the name of Sheffield. I'm not sure what Sheffield's first name was, but he was, I believe, the producer or had some kind of role in an English production company. Anyways, Mark finally called me and said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll send you a release. I'll agree to pay you so much money. And at that point, it was only the book. There wasn't any mention of a movie. It was just the book. I said, well, I'd want to read the manuscript first. He said, okay. So he sent me a release and a contract that called for me getting $1,000, and I declined it. I said, I'm not going to get, you owe me a lot more than that $1,000.
That's not a lot of money.
No. And anyways, I got an attorney involved in it, and they did another contract, and the contract called for $17,500 plus so much for each copy and so forth. And they sent it to him. He called the attorney. I didn't talk to the attorney. He didn't call me directly. He called my attorney and told my attorney it was agreeable and it would be all right. But then we never heard any more from him. And eventually the book was published, and then the movie. I went back to my attorney, said, well, I don't have any practicing rights in the UK, so you're going to have to hire an attorney in the UK. I actually flew to the UK. I spoke to one attorney, didn't want to do it. Although he was recommended to me. I went to him. He didn't want to do it. I went to another attorney, and he said, Barster, they call him. And he said, there's a lot of complications involved in this because part of this was negotiated in the United States, and now some of it's done here. I said, but the publication was done here. He said, yeah, but I'm not sure about it. I don't know if I can take the case. And then he asked me, he called me, I went back to the States, he called me and he said, I'll do it, but I need a $10,000 retainer fee. But I can't guarantee you anything. And I said, well, so much for that. Anyways, the book was published, the movie was made, and I'm stuck with that. The book distorted almost everything that I said during the interview. The movie, a lot of the movie, and Mark on the phone readily admitted to me he dubbed my voice in. He dubbed words and phrases in on my interview, on all 3 of the interviews. And I said, why the heck would you do that? And he said, well, I'm approaching this as a skeptic, and I can't allow a lot of this information to be one-sided. I want it to be, he wanted it to be one-sided. He said, I didn't want it to be in the type of manner that you presented it. And I said, well, I told the truth, and I told you what what the truth was and what I wanted you to present to the public. He said, well, I'm sorry. And he hung up and changed his number, and I've never talked to him since. So it's a negative. A lot of it's negative. There's a little bit of it that's truthful, but how he tried to distort the disinformation campaign was absolutely wrong, and how he distorted the Paul Benowitz incident, and so I came away from it with a very, very negative view of the Mirage Man, and the movie and the book.
So did they actually use your voice and dub it into the movie, or did they just take parts of your voice and put them out of context, or did they use another voice, somebody else's voice?
Well, he was pretty tricky because we had other than the interview, we spent a lot of time together, just walking around, talking about different subjects. He'd ask me a number of questions about things, what my interpretation of a certain event was, but he recorded it all, and I didn't know he recorded it. We actually sat in a bar one night, and there was a band on stage. We were sitting all the way in the back of the club, but you could still hear the music. And he asked me all these really kind of strange questions. I just didn't realize that he was recording it and what his intentions were later. So he used a lot of those questions and answers between the two of us, and he dubbed my responses into the interview in the movie. And there's totally distorted some of the stuff. So he was a very deceitful person. I've sent him letters. I've confronted him on social media, and he just refuses to. And now recently, he's made contact with another person who told the other person that there wasn't any contract, and I was never promised any money. Not anybody with common sense could figure out that you wouldn't do something like that without being paid. Yeah. So now that's what he's saying now.
They did a lot behind your back, and I guess $1,000 was really just a slap in the face. So how did you go back in negotiations with them in good faith?
Well, my attorney did, and we came up with a $17,500 fee plus. I think it was so much a book. I can't remember what it was, but and I thought that was reasonable, considering I should have gotten a lot more. But he refused. He never made any offers or never agreed to that contract.
Did you know? Did you know at that time that he was going to do a book and a movie, or did you just think initially it was just a book?
No. Well, in Laughlin, he only spoke about the movie, kind of a documentary.
Gotcha. And
he had talked about him having some contacts with a production company in the UK, and also one in Scotland, and one in, I believe it was Ireland. Anyways, he had contacts because he had done one before, and he wanted to do a doc special, and he was hoping he tried that maybe the History Channel or the Discovery or channel would become involved in it. But he wasn't sure at that point. And he only spoke of the movie or the documentary then. But when I spoke to him again, the second time in Albuquerque, he came in Albuquerque twice. There was two different occasions in Albuquerque. The second time he talked about a book. He said, and it was always we could write a book. We could do this. We could do that. We could make a lot of money on this. We could do this. But it was never we. It was only him. And John, his partner, John put up a lot of money. I can't remember how many pounds it was. And he was never paid back either.
So did you ever feel, now they're negotiating it and they're doing things internationally. So they're in the UK and you're in the United States, which makes things a little trickier. Did you ever think that they did that on purpose and used all that red tape as kind of a bargaining tool that would definitely favor them?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And it was done all in their ring, so to speak, and they didn't want anybody else to become involved, and they knew that they had some protection. Even attorney, one of the second attorney I spoke to in UK, he told me, he said, this is a kind of a touchy matter. You could sue in the United States and you could go through, or you could go through an international court. But if you get a judgment in the United States, it's not going to be valid in the UK. If you get a judgment in the UK, he had a place in Switzerland too, or some relative that lived in Switzerland that he'd spent a lot of time at. In fact, he at one point when I met him in Albuquerque, invited me to Switzerland, and it was just a complicated mess. There has been some a movement since then in the last 13 years to prevent some of these things from happening. But at that time in 2006, there wasn't any agreement, agreement between the United States and UK or with any other countries. So you could swindle a person out of money by including them in a book or interviewing them and then putting them on their face on a special and get away with it. But
and ultimately you're just going to have to give in, because you're going to pour as much money as you possibly can or want to. And basically they can just kind of sit back and watch this thing unfold and wait you out possibly.
Exactly. So I kind of got taken on that one.
So what was the final agreement then that actually put that movie on the screen?
I never got a penny.
Wow.
There wasn't any. I never received a penny, even though I was promised money. I was promised money on the interview, promised money on the book. I never received a penny.
I think that's tough, but I like the movie, and I think you look good in it. And one of the things that I see with you is this 100% confidence in your ability to remember all the events, and remember them with vivid detail. So did your military career ever become confusing where you just had to stop yourself and say, wait a minute, because there's a lot of stuff that, we only get to see a glimpse into your life, but so much went on and it just seemed so confusing. Did you just have to ever stop and just reorganize from time to time to make sure that everything you were doing was on the up and up and a legitimate purpose that would benefit the United States and yourself in some way?
Well, I'm a very strong-willed person. I've been through a lot before, and my family was all military. I brought up with a strict military family. My father was in the Air Force, and my uncle was in the Air Force. And so I was very strong-willed. When I went into regular Air Force, I did some very interesting things. And then when I went into OSI, now OSI isn't actually military. It's something similar to NCIS, or you see on TV, NCIS. They're civilian personnel assigned to a military unit. So the AFOSI, I know I was categorized as being a sergeant. I was never a sergeant in AFOSI. I was a special agent, and there are different categories of special agents. So, but when I started the career as in OSI in 1978, I had no idea that I was going to get involved in the subject of UFOs. I had known nothing about UFOs prior to that.
How old were you in 1978?
In 1978, I was 25 years old.
So it's a pretty big deal to do this at 25 years old or any age.
Well, I was in college. I got out, got this job. Again, I'd been in some things in the regular Air Force that I was, that had put some strain on me and put me in stressful situations. I knew I could handle it. And OSI was a very, very, very tough agency to get into. About only 10% of everyone, of the people that applied would actually get a job. I mean, there's a whole whirlwind of pre-employment and application process and physical fitness and all these things you have to pass to get in. And of course, a psychological evaluation and a polygraph. You had to take a polygraph to get in. And once I got in, I went to the OSI Academy, which back then was in the Forstall building in Washington, D.C. That's where the Department of Energy was located. But the OSI Academy was in that building. Went through that, and then I was immediately placed in counterintelligence. Then I went to the CIA counterintelligence, counterespionage course, and then a short course later through DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency. But again, there wasn't any mention of UFOs during any of my training in that training. The only thing that was ever mentioned was that the OSI conducted some special investigations into highly classified projects. That was kind of a catch-all thing, a catch-all type of investigations that we could become involved with, and that's what they told us. And so when I got to Kirtland, which was my first assignment, Kirtland Air Force Base, I was assigned to the District 17 office and then in the Counterintelligence Division. I was there about 4 or 5 months when my boss told me that I was going to be briefed into a special projects program.
Do you feel that they were grooming you the whole time for this, or did it just suddenly become this after a certain period of time?
No, I kind of hate to even mention that, but my father was a colonel in the Air Force, and he was still in, and he had some friends, and my dad was in intelligence his entire career. Not entire career, let me correct myself. He was in Korea as a pilot. He went into the Air Force as a pilot right out of Amherst College in Massachusetts. He went to flight training school. Anyways, he was a pilot and the B-26s. And he was shot down over Korea, but he was fortunate enough to be rescued by a Greek army unit, and he never flew again. He went immediately after his wounds healed. He went into intelligence, and my dad spent the next 28 years or so of his career in intelligence. So he spent the entire time in intelligence. And I knew that, and I knew a lot of his friends. And so I think, although no one's ever actually stated this to my face, but I think they were grooming me. I think there was somebody that said, I think he needs to follow in his dad's footsteps. And so I think, and I can't ever be positive about this, but my feelings is that, yeah, I was groomed. I was briefed into a program. The first program I was briefed into, it mentioned exotic technology. I didn't actually say extraterrestrials, but when I became involved with the Paul Benowitz incident, I was briefed into the second program. That was Project Aquarius program, which gave the full history of the United States involvement, beginning with the Roswell crash, and then mentioning some of the other crashes and the contacts we'd had with extraterrestrials. So that astounded me. That made me wonder. I remember the briefing, when I got the briefing, was on the west side of Kirtland Air Force Base at the Air Force Special Security Office. Briefing lasted probably an hour and a half. It was done by a colonel. There was 6 of us in the room. And I got in my OSI car and I had to drive across the base to the east side of the base because that's where the OSI office was located. I remember driving, thinking of what I just had access to. I was just briefed on, and actually pulled over to the side of the road and parked in a little parking area right next to a jogging park. And I sat there for probably 20 minutes trying to grasp what I just had heard, not understanding it. I mean, sitting there thinking, this is real? We really? I mean, this is for real? I'd never heard of the Roswell incident, even though my dad had been stationed at Roswell. I had no idea. I mean, my brother was the one that believed in the UFOs. He read the True magazines back in the 60s. But me, I just didn't. I never had any interest in it. And here I am now being briefed into the program thinking, my God, this stuff is real. It is hard to believe. It is. I mean, it's like, and you always question, like, why did they just give me this briefing? And is it for real? Or is it some kind of game they're playing? I mean, all these things go through your mind. Well, I find out later, there's no game involved. It's fact. During my 11-year career, I mean, I learned that it was fact. I mean, everything that they told me was, in fact, true. And then that's when I started the Paul Benowitz case and handled that for a number of years. And there was several other cases involving UFOs and ET contacts and so forth I handled at Kirtland during that time, too.
I think when, we have a lot of believers out there. Now, you have varying degrees of belief. You have people that it could be any matter of amount of belief, but when you're actually hit with the cold hard data that you had to look at, what was that like? What was that initial shock like? That this stuff exists and it's bigger than you could possibly imagine. What was that like?
It was stunning. The fact that I had no conditioning for it. I mean, we sit in a room, you really don't know what the briefing is going to be. The first part of the briefing was a film. He showed the film of the recovery, the Roswell. The film was an old film. I think it was 16 millimeter, I believe, back in those days. And he didn't say anything. He just showed the movie. And it was about 30 minutes or something to that effect, roughly 30 minutes. And then after it was over with, he looked at everyone in the class. There were 6 of us. And he said, well, what do you think of that? And we thought, well, is it a movie that the Air Force made, or is it, what is this? And then that's when he said, everything you saw in that movie is fact. And then he went into the briefing of 1947, 2 crafts crashed over to Mexico, and he went on and gave us that entire briefing. Well, it was stunning. I mean, you're sitting there thinking, my God, I'd never heard of this. So we really, I mean, I'd seen movies about UFOs when I was kids and so forth, but I said, well, this is real. I'm saying to myself, this is for real. And then there was a question and answer period later after it was over with. And you hear the questions, and some of these people that were asking questions, you could tell they were questioning whether what we had just heard and what we had just seen is in fact real, or are we involved in some kind of psychological game?
Right.
And he assured us, he said, I guarantee you, this is no psychological game. What you've just heard and seen is absolutely fact. The other thing
let me say this really quick, that I would think that, if there's you and a few people in that room, I mean, learning this would change your outlook on everything, and if this happened to me, it would change my outlook on everything. If it happened to the general population of the United States at any given time, it would change most people's outlook on everything. So was that the point?
Yes. And it does change you, especially some of the very, very highly classified and highly sensitive information that you learned that had occurred, and what we learned from the even one, the alien that survived the Roswell crash, the Corona crash. The government, the public's calling it Roswell, but actually the government calls it the Corona crash because it actually crashed not far from Corona, New Mexico, not Roswell. It's quite a ways from Roswell. But the Brazil Ranch is far north of Roswell, and his land extended up towards Corona. So, the books, going back to Berlitz and Moore's book in 79 and 80, they coined it the Roswell crash. But, in actuality, it could be the Corona and Magdalena crash or Horse Mesa crash. There's a second craft landed way out there. But yeah, and there's things that we learned from the even that is kind of shocking. I mean, when you're told that this particular civilization is thousands of years more advanced than you are, and they've been visiting Earth for about 2,000 years, you start thinking, what was Jesus? Was Jesus one of them? It doesn't say that. I mean, nobody's ever told me that. But you start thinking about that. You're thinking, well, 2,000 years ago, that's about, what, is Jesus involved?
Right.
Was he a spaceman? And so you start questioning all these things. And then there's a lot of things that you learn that are subject to really contemplating what it means when you hear about something that had occurred or something that they had done, the ETs, and then you think yourself, how's that affected Earth's life, and you start thinking all sorts of things. And then one thing you also learn is that, and he tells you this right off the bat, you're only learning the basic stuff. This is a basic briefing. So everything's compartmented in the military and in the government and intelligence community. And I learned over the years that I only knew probably 10 or 15%. And I don't know that there's anyone, maybe a few people that know it all. But there's so much that I learned later on that wasn't part of the briefing, that I learned that we were doing and that the aliens provided to us, or the threats. I always tell people they want to know it all. I want to know it all. I always say to them, and I don't want to be dramatic or with a statement, but be careful what you ask for, because if you sit down and know it all, you might be not the same forever in your life.
Right. At any time, did any of this initially frighten you?
Oh, yes. I'm not the type of guy, and again, I don't want to brag, but I'm not the type of guy that scares easy. But I guarantee you there are some things that I was subjected to, and there was some other incidents I was involved in that scared the dickens out of me. Yes, it definitely did scare me.
Do they have, does the military have a way of dealing with that? Because I don't care who you are. I mean, you were hit with something huge, and ultimately that's going to change your behavior in some way. I mean, whether it be positive or negative. Do they have a way of dealing with that shock?
Well, in order to get in intelligence, you have to go through a lot of really tough training and psychological evaluations and so forth, testing. And so you should be, they weed out the people that probably couldn't grasp it. But, you're only a human being. So there was never any counselors, but my boss, one of my bosses, who had been briefed in a program, and actually had worked in a program for 12 years prior to me being briefed into, he pulled me aside once. We went into a secure room, and he sat down and he said, "Is any of this too much? Is there anything here that you're doing that maybe you can't handle?" And, I said, "Absolutely not. I can handle it all. I think about it a lot." I mean, you have to think that, what else do we know that I don't know? And what if the government knows that I don't know? And he knew a lot more. He said, well, if you ever get briefed on all of it, you'll never be the same. He told me that, as a colonel had said that earlier. And I said, well, I don't know if I want to know it all.
I'm right there with you, man. Wow. So did they ever give you, initially right away, did they give you what your objective would be, or did that wait?
No, there were 122 counterintelligence officers throughout the United States that was investigating and handling all these incidents. I wasn't the only one. There was 3 of us at the Kirtland, and then they're scattered all over the United States, the other ones. And they all been briefed, and they're all working on that, and what I was working on. And I was going to be investigating every case, legitimate case of UFO sightings by military personnel over a military installation or involving military aircraft, or any other special projects that I was assigned to. And that was what I was briefed on, and that's what I did. The Paul Benowitz case was very, very complicated, involved a lot of different aspects that I did brief when I did the UFO MegaCon in Laughlin in March. I gave a 80-minute briefing on that and presentation on that Paul Benowitz case. So, and there was a lot of things that people never knew before that I brought up that was had been classified, but I don't think classified anymore. I was signed a security pledge, and that's long gone. So I guess I'll take the heat for it. I'm talking about it, and I haven't been.
So they initially told you that you're going to be investigating UFOs and how they related to Air Force and Air Force property. So right then, I mean, you had to say to yourself, wow, these things are interacting with the Air Force, and we're going to be involved with cases that involve the Air Force. But what about civilian cases? Did you have any involvement in that at all? I mean, other than Paul Benowitz, who kind of became involved with you later.
Well, Paul Benowitz, his case involved the military, involved the Air Force Base. So that's how we were connected to it. And so we were authorized to investigate that case. There were some other cases that involved strictly civilian sightings that were of a big magnitude, and that was legitimate UFO sighting. Now we didn't take reports of people that saw a flashing light out in the sky or something to that effect that were civilian, strictly civilian. We didn't handle any of that. We would suggest they contact MUFON or AFPRO or somebody else. We weren't interested in those cases. We were interested in cases that involved legitimate sightings of unknown crafts. And a lot of these unknown crafts that the civilians were reporting was actually some kind of an Air Force or military experimental aircraft. And that's how we got connected to that. We found a flight. Somebody reported something extraordinary to us, and we would go ahead and look into it and find out that during that particular time period, over that particular place, there was in fact a highly classified aircraft flying and doing maneuvers or doing some kind of testing, and then we relayed it. Okay, yeah, in fact, that is Air Force connected, military connected. And then we would go back and tell the person, geez, I don't know. We don't know what it is. You probably just saw a real UFO. We don't have any answer for you. And we just leave it at that. Let them decide on their own. But when we knew what it was, we would be content with that. Now, there are some cases where somebody reported something, and we knew there wasn't any military aircrafts flying in that area, and they had some kind of verifying data or evidence, such as a photograph. And we would take the photograph and tell them, hey, we're going to look at this photograph because I don't know what it is. And truly, we didn't know what it was. And I send it off and have it analyzed, and sometimes I'd get something back, and other times I wouldn't get anything back. When Project Blue Book closed in 1969 after the Condon report, the Air Force wanted to get rid of this matter, although they still knew they had to investigate and keep investigating it. So they asked other agencies if they wanted to be the clearinghouse for it, and DIA, which was relatively new, they came into existence in 1961, so they were about 8 or 9 years old. DIA put their hand up and said, "Hey, we'll take it." So then all these reports went through the Air Force to DIA for storing after that. And then, but we still, the Air Force still had a number of special agents or intelligence officers that were investigating these things, even after 1969. And I'm a classic example of one of them. Myself and others who have came forward saying, "Yeah, we did it." And so it proved that the Air Force was still interested in the subject. But the charter was, we would investigate it if it involved an Air Force person, if it involved an Air Force aircraft, if it involved Air Force, any other Air Force property, it was occurred on or near an Air Force installation, or if it was some kind of a direct threat to national security. That was our charter.
You investigated these cases and you knew your objective. Did you, it's kind of a long question, but did you have limitations? Was there a budget? You had a problem and a strategy to deal with it and a result. What could you do and what couldn't you do?
Well, what we do is that once we get a complaint, and we call it a complaint or information presented to us, we do an Air Force I Form 1, which is it's called a complaint form. Or we had another form. It was a DIA form 16 that involved, if it was real highly classified, we'd fill it out on that. And we'd send it up. We wouldn't do anything initially. We'd send it up to our chain of command, which went through Headquarters Air Force and over to DIA. And then we'd wait for permission to come back down through the channels. And once we got permission, it would dictate what they wanted us to do, what our objective was, and what our limitations were. And we would have a budget. And I tell you, we never ran out of money. I don't know where the money came from, but if we had to do something, we had to buy something. We had a particular, the Paul Benowitz case, we rented, I don't know what the final dollar amount was in that 5-year investigation, but it must have been close to $200,000 to $300,000.
You rented the house across the street, right, or somewhere near him?
No, we didn't rent that house. We rented another house. The house across the street ought to have been rented. That's another story. We rented a house on the other side of him. We rented 2 houses. We rented one house. We set up all the equipment, and we found out that the particular house we were into didn't have a good vantage point. Our technical agent said, "You know what? We need that house over there." So we actually were able to rent this house from another person, the house we rented. So we rented actually 2 houses, and it was, we're talking back in the early 80s, and it was, $700-800 a month, I think, something to that effect. And we were paying it, and it wasn't out of the intelligence community didn't operate out of any kind of purchase order or purchase request where you get a government check. We had our own, we call it confidential funds. We'd pay them out of a bank, a local Albuquerque bank. I think it was the Bank of Albuquerque we would use. The money would be deposited in the bank, and I don't know who deposited it. Somebody did. And then we would write the checks out of that. Sometimes we'd go to the bank and get a draft. Sometimes when we needed cash, we'd go down and to the bank and get the cash advance. I mean, that's how it worked in the intelligence community. It wasn't the Air Force that some pay officer wrote a check and gave it to that person. So that person that we're renting this house from only knows that we're giving them under identity of we used a couple different cover companies, one particular a contractor, general contractor, and another under a electrical supply company. So we were covered. Everything was covered. These people were getting their money. They didn't really care where it came from.
How hard is it to cover up a legitimate UFO case observed by a group or more than one person that involved the Air Force?
I had one case once of this is actually involved Civil Air Patrol, which is an entity of the United States Air Force, a civilian entity. There are some military, but most military retirees that are working for Civil Air Patrol. But there was a Civil Air Patrol exercise where they had 5 or 6 planes up flying around, and they had Civil Air Patrol, which are most of the ones in this particular case were within probably between 18 and 20-year-olds, some age range. That's about the age range. Maybe a little bit younger. And then there was always a pilot. The pilot was a retired Air Force pilot, or maybe sometimes active duty, but most of the time retired. And they were flying a formation. There was 6 Cessna 180s flying in northern New Mexico, and they spotted this UFO, which there were, I think, 11 or 12 people in the planes. There were 5 planes, I think, that saw it. The UFO made some uncharacteristic maneuvers. It flew real close to one particular airplane, and so the planes landed at Kirtland, and one of the pilots immediately called the OSI and reported it to us. And myself and another agent went out there and sat down with the group, all of them in one particular part of the hangar, in the pilot debriefing room, and they told us what they saw, and they're all excited. Well, some pictures were taken, but they were on 35 millimeters, so they hadn't been developed yet. And we said, well, we'll take the cameras, we'll develop them, we'll give them back to you, and just and give you the camera back and explain what you saw. So we went back, and we have our own photo lab, and we developed them. And well, lo and behold, they weren't anything that we, as I said earlier, about something that was observed that we didn't know about. There wasn't any testing. This wasn't an Air Force or some other military test vehicle. This was, in fact, a true ET craft. The characteristics and some of these pictures were extraordinary. I mean, I can't believe that these 16 or 17, 18-year-olds were taking these fantastic pictures. I mean, they had the f-stop. They really did some fantastic pictures. Unfortunately,
they took photo in high school. I did the same thing.
Okay. They knew what to do with the camera.
Absolutely.
And anyways, when I get the report back from headquarters, number one, they weren't going to get the photos back, and to tell them what they saw was, in fact, a Air Force test vehicle. And so I couldn't get them all together at one time, but eventually I briefed all of them that what they saw was an Air Force test vehicle.
I could buy that.
And I think most of them accepted it. I mean, the way I presented it, the one person that didn't was it was a retired Air Force lieutenant colonel. He flew F-106s and flew in Vietnam, F-4s, and he'd seen a lot of things, and he was a smart old guy, and the kids bought it and laughed. And the retired colonel came up to me and he said, "You know what? You can tell them whatever you want. You can blow smoke up their skirts and pants, but I'm not buying it." And I said, "Well, Colonel, all I can tell you is what I was told." He said, "I understand. No, I understand." He said, "But that wasn't any of our experimental crafts. That wasn't anything that had to defy gravity, and we don't have anything that can do that. He said, I've been retired for a few years, but I can tell you that wasn't one of ours. And I just let it go at that. I was argue with him. I said, well, sir, you have a right to believe whatever you want to believe. I never heard any more thing from him about it, or it was never in a newspaper or anything like that.
So let's say let's say you have a scenario with a huge complaint. Now, you called it a complaint. So what's the response like? Is there multiple black vehicles and personnel, or trying to control damage, or is it just you and maybe a couple of other people that do the same job you are?
I'm not sure of the question. Try that again.
Well, if you have a complaint, or if you have a situation where you have a sighting by multiple people, what's the response time like? Are you right there, and is there multiple? Are you driving? Is it a huge dramatic presence that you show up in multiple vehicles, or do you try to keep it subtle and try to keep it downplay it a bit?
Well, it depends on the time frame involved. Most of what we get is after the fact. It's time, sometimes a day or two, and sometimes a week, and sometimes even longer than that. If it's current, if it's something that it was happening right then, and there was an incident, one that sticks in my mind was south of the base. We had the Kirtland Air Force Base trained pararescue personnel, and there was a lot of helicopters that flew out south of the base. There was a training area, and and this is all Air Force people. There wasn't any civilians involved in this, but these people claimed this craft came in, flew right over their top of their helicopter, which they were flying a CH-53 helicopter, and there was 5 pararescue guys in the aircraft, 2 pilot and a co-pilot, 3 crew members and a flight engineer. And so there were 8 people that saw this, and the helicopter landed immediately. This craft flew over towards the side of a mountain and landed, which would have been on the base. We were immediately notified, and actually myself and this other agent, we were not more than a couple miles away. We were on another case. We were interviewing some people. We get the call on a radio, and so we the radio in the vehicle, the 2-way radio, and we immediately responded out there. So we got there. This was the only time that I can remember we got there within probably 20, 25 minutes of the sighting. And these, the crew members, this pilot and co-pilot, they're both Vietnam veterans, and the pararescue guys, most of them were trainees. There was a senior sergeant who was a trainer, and he'd been around, and they were all shaken up. They were really noticeably shaken. And the lieutenant colonel, the command pilot, told me, he said, the thing landed over there against that mountain. He said, and where he was pointing to was a U.S. Geological Survey station that's over there. I said, okay, we'll go over and check it out. So we drove over there, myself and the other agent, and we couldn't find anything. We had a Jeep. We were in a CJ7 Jeep, and we drove up this really bad road and up and around, and we searched this whole area. We didn't see anything. Well, when we went back to interview him to get more statements from him, they gave us more precise location of where it landed. And actually, it came from another helicopter that had seen it and actually flew over towards where it landed. The helicopter, the crew I was talking to, they landed immediately. This other crew, Air Force, because there was 5 other helicopters up, he flew over, and it was just him, the pilot, co-pilot, and the flight engineer, and flew right over this thing. He said it was all black and was sitting on the ground. And he showed us. So we actually had to leave the base and go out and then come back in order to get to it, because there wasn't any roads to where when we got over there, it was a landing site. We saw marks, we saw black spots, and then we treated it as an actual landing, and we processed it in accordance with that. But the craft was obviously gone, but something had landed there.
I have a person who Well, I once knew, and I have spoken extensively about government cover-ups, and he has firsthand knowledge, but really won't go on record. And I once asked him about the possibility that our government was covering up the UFO alien phenomena and with disinformation and deception. And he said to me once, and I wrote this down, sometimes it's too easy. Deception doesn't have to be convincing. It just has to have enough layers so it's incontrovertible without being confirmable, which is a good quote. Is that true?
Absolutely. It's right out of the manual. Whoever told you that has some knowledge of counterintelligence.
Right.
We don't call it disinformation. We call it counterintelligence.
Right.
Counterintelligence operation. And sometimes, like Paul Benowitz, classical case, we didn't have to convince him of anything. He was thoroughly convinced on his own. He wouldn't let us influence him in any way. He said, I know they're aliens. I know these are hostile crafts, and I know it. I don't want you to, he always said, insult my intelligence by telling me I don't know what I'm talking about. And so we didn't. We just let him believe what he wanted to believe, because he was believing they were all UFOs. And in fact, most of what he was seeing was, in fact, classified drones. Back then, the drones were being tested. And there wasn't any unclassified drones back in those days. They were all highly classified. And what he was seeing were drones. And we didn't have to convince him. He said there were UFOs, so okay. Well, I'm not gonna argue with you.
So how deep does it go, and are the layers endless until the situation is essentially buried?
Yes. It's a very complex system. It starts with a counterintelligence network that you develop, including local news media, local watch. We call them local intelligence watch personnel, who watches out for strange things happening around the base, and we get the reports. We penetrated. I can speak for my job at Kirtland, but we had developed sources of information in all the local television and news media. We had a source of information that would tell us immediately when they got something. So we were able to sometimes convince and sometimes not. Sometimes we could influence what they aired, and sometimes we couldn't. I mean, it was a what we call a gentleman's agreement. Basically, is that they told us what they had, and we tell them, what, I don't think you should report that because it could be highly classified. And 9 times out of 10, I should say about 7 times out of 10, they wouldn't report it. The other couple times they would report it, but they would cover it up, so to speak. It'd be one-time report. They'd say, we're going to report it one time on the 6 o'clock news, but it's not going to be on the 10 o'clock, or we'll report it on the 10 o'clock and we won't report it again. There's something to that effect. We'd have some kind of agreement with them.
Might we assume, then there would, go ahead, I'm sorry.
And then we'd have people that lived around the base that we would recruit. And most of these people are retirees who would love to get involved. I mean, they're retired. They're not doing anything. And we tell them, hey, we want you to look out. There may be terrorists. There may be spies. There might be strange things flying around in the skies. We need you as our eyes out here. And, they were the best of the best of the best. And so they would report back to us on strange things occurring. So you had a intelligence net set up around the base. And that's every single base, not just Air Force, but the Army and the Navy did the same thing. And they'd set up this really complicated network. And we get information flowing back to us. Now, 80% of the information we're getting is just crap. Nothing. There's nothing to it. They're seeing Mars, or they're seeing an aircraft taken off from the runway, or they're seeing a plane flying without their lights, or something to that effect. And so, but there was the other 20% that was what we investigated and what we became involved with. Because what we do is we get a report, hey, south of the base, or east of the base, or north of the base, or one of our assets outside the base would report there was this object here and there and this, or somebody would come to us and report something. We check with our sources outside the base, and they'd confirm it. Yeah, there was this black object that was above us, and it flew over here and it flew over there, and it didn't have any navigation lights. Okay, great. So then we'd start checking into it. Now that's the threat, could be a threat to the base. And so we check into it. We go through the classified reporting system. We check with Det 3, which was Area 51. You got anything flying out here? Yep. We had the F-117 flying back in those days. It was just testing. We had a F-117 flying and did a certain mission on this course, this vector. So we check it all. And okay, it was a 117. But we were going to tell anybody it was 117. Yeah, UFO. Hey, you guys saw a UFO. Praise him for it. Oh, then, okay, well, where was it doing? I don't know. Because I always tell people, if you see something flying and it has lights flashing, it's probably not a UFO, because the ETs don't fly with FAA approved navigation design.
I agree with you with that for sure.
But the F-117 and even some other experimental craft, they're flying without any lights, because the military in combat areas or combat zones or in cross border flights, such as into the Soviet Union or into China, they're not going to put their lights on. So they turn them all off, and it can be done there. But most of the time in the States, unless it's some kind of really secret mission, and they have to keep their FAA navigation like that. But there are times when they were testing the F-117 and even the B-2 without the lights. They were flying without lights. And then most of the time in that time frame, these black objects that were being seen were in fact the 117, or the B-2.
Might we assume military cover-up and disinformation programs go, through all three branches of government? I know indirectly, but are all three branches briefed, or is it a need-to-know scenario?
I was never in a position to know that. I've heard, but I don't know for a fact. I know that what I did went up the chain and came back down. Now I've heard Harrison Schmitt, the late Harrison Schmitt, who's a senator from New Mexico. I knew somebody had briefed him on some things. Former astronaut. I know he knew a lot. But there was a case that happened back in the early 80s, and he couldn't get any information. One of his constituents came to him and said, this strange object landed. These little people came out, got out, walked around, took soil samples and so forth. They disabled our car and this and that and this. And in fact, that happened. We investigated it. We did a really, 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 really deep investigation on that. And we got some extraordinary evidence. Well, the people that witnessed it and reported it was from New Mexico, and they reported to Senator Schmitt. We wanted to know what it was. And so he had made some inquiries to the Air Force. The Air Force wouldn't tell him anything. He went over to the CIA and the DIA, and they wouldn't tell him anything. So he came out to the base. He came out to our office. My boss called me. Our office was in the secure area of a building, so nobody could actually walk into our office. It had come through a secure portal, so to speak, and ask, and then we would escort him back, or we would come up and talk to him in another room. And he specifically asked for me. He said, I need to talk to Special Agent Richard Doty. And the clerk up front says, well, sir, he's I'm a senator, United States Senator, and I want to talk to him. So she called me and she said, there's a Senator Schmitt up here that wants to talk to you. And I said, okay. So I thought, well, maybe he wants to report something. So I walked up and he introduced himself, very polite, very nice, well-mannered man. He said, I need to talk to you and I need to be in a secure area when I do it. So I said, okay, sir. So, being a U.S. Senator and former astronaut, former military pilot, I gave him all the courtesies I could give him. We went back to this room, a secure room, went in there. I said, it's secure. I turned on the special anti-intrusion system. I said, what can I do for you? And then he asked me about this incident. He kind of put me in a corner, because he knew a lot. He knew a lot about it. He specifically gave details that only somebody had been there would have known. And he didn't tell me that he got this from the witnesses. I said, where did you? So I approached it in a different manner. I said, well, I started asking questions. When you're backed up, you start asking the questions. I said, well, where did you get this information? He said, well, I got it from one of the witnesses, one of the people that were there. And they reported it to you because they gave me your name. I said, okay, I know what you're talking about. I said, you know what, sir? We're still investigating that. He said, okay. And I said, it's a policy of the government not to release any information on any type of case, whether it was a civil or whether it was an intelligence case or a criminal case, until the case is closed. I can't discuss anything. He said, and then he was very polite. He said, I understand. He gives me his card. He gives me some 2 secret phone numbers. He said, these aren't published. Please call me. He said, I don't want you to discuss anything. I know security limits and so forth over the phone, but I need to know I need to know about this. I said, okay, sir, I will contact you. I said, you will either hear from me or from somebody else. I said, you got to understand that I have a chain of command that I have to follow, and I have certain rules I have to follow. And he said, I fully understand that. He said, but if you can't answer it, maybe the Air Force, the Secretary of the Air Force can, or the Inspector General. I'll go back a little bit. SI didn't operate within the same Air Force system as other agencies. We were a direct reporting unit, meaning that we reported directly to the Inspector General of the United States Air Force. We didn't report to any local commanders or any colonels or anybody else. We went right up. So we couldn't be influenced by anybody. The Inspector General, and then he reported to the Secretary of the Air Force, and that was the chain. So I told him, I said, well, somebody above me probably would. So I went and reported it. I sent a message up, an immediate message all the way up the chain of command, and they told me they'll take care of it. And that was the last I heard from Senator Schmidt.
My Alien Life Podcast.
Thank you for listening to Hour 1 of this 2-hour special of My Alien Life with Richard Doty. You can find my website at www.myalienlifepodcast.com, and please subscribe to my latest downloads at iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, and at podbean.com. And please follow me and like me on Facebook and Twitter. My Alien Life is written and produced for broadcast at Studio 254 in the Northern Rocky Mountains. The music you are hearing is produced and created by ELEON. You can find all ELEON's work online at Heart Dance Records.